Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Lots happening on Capitol Hill. Let's dive in. President Trump addressed the nation Tuesday night, explaining why he's determined to pursue all legal and constitutional avenues to, quote, stop the theft of the presidential election. He said one of the most solemn duties of a president is to protect the integrity of Americans' sacred right to vote. He said in the video, Americans must be able to have complete faith in the confidence of their elections. The fate of our democracy depends upon it. Adding, now is the time for the American people to raise their voices and demand that this injustice be immediately corrected. Our elections must be fair, they must be honest, they must be transparent, and they must be 100% free of fraud. Trump went on to accuse the Democratic officials in key swing states of using the pandemic as an excuse to change voting rules and allow fraud on a massive scale in the country. Trump has repeatedly alleged widespread fraud, but this was the first time he called on Americans to be vocal about it. He called on the American people to raise their voices and demand the injustice be corrected. To explain why he believes there's widespread fraud, President Trump laid out, quote, the facts that every American needs to know. He went back to election night, saying on November 3rd, swing states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, all saw him leading. But then the vote count stopped abruptly in the early hours, until a series of, quote, massive and statistically inconceivable vote dumps happened, which overturned the results. Trump said those numbers were, quote, miraculously just enough to push Joe Biden into the lead. Adding, these glaring anomalies are just the tip of the iceberg. Trump also pointed to key states like Ohio, Florida, and Iowa, which have for the past 40 years correctly predicted the winner of the presidential election, saying he won all by historic margins, as well as 18 of the 19 bellwether counties. Trump noted that in history, the last time a candidate made it to the White House without winning those was in 1960. He also pointed out that Democrats had lost 25 out of the 46 toss-up House seats, and that out of the 15 seats Democrats were projected to gain, they instead lost 14. Trump also noted how his campaign garnered about 75 million votes. That's around 12 million more than what he had in 2016. It's the largest recorded vote increase for an incumbent president. Trump then pointed to Biden, quote, somehow receiving 11.7 million more votes than Barack Obama, and he beat Barack Obama all over the country, something Trump said is historically, mathematically, politically, and logically impossible. Trump also addressed the virus deal, threatening to veto it unless Congress agrees to increase the $600 stimulus checks to $2,000 direct payments to Americans.
Congress found plenty of money for foreign countries, lobbyists, and special interests, while sending the bare minimum to the American people who need it. It wasn't their fault. It was China's fault.
He says despite all the wasteful spending, the $900 billion package only gives American taxpayers $600 each in relief.
I am asking Congress to amend this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple. I'm also asking Congress to immediately get rid of the wasteful and unnecessary items from this legislation.
Trump pointed to hundreds of millions of dollars tagged for the Egyptian military, Cambodia, Burma, and gender programs in Pakistan. Trump says lawmakers need to send him something suitable, or else the next administration will have to sign off on it. And he says maybe he will be the next administration. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have since agreed to increase the stimulus checks to $2,000. Pelosi tweeted, Republicans repeatedly refused to say what amount the president wanted for direct checks. At last, the president has agreed to $2,000. Democrats are ready to bring this to the floor this week by unanimous consent. Let's do it. Schumer tweeted, we spent months trying to secure $2,000 checks, but Republicans blocked it. Trump needs to sign the bill to help people and keep the government open, and we're glad to pass more aid Americans need. The $600 proposal has sparked quite the backlash across social media. Many saying it's hypocritical of the government to shut down the economy. people lose their jobs, and then Congress deems $600 sufficient funds, while spending hundreds of millions on foreign countries such as Burma, Nepal, and on things called the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act. A former congressional candidate noted the deal also nullified the president's use of the Insurrection Act. Actually, the line in question is from the defense bill. Formerly known as H.R. 6395, the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, for fiscal year 2021, which included the amendment to the Insurrection Act. Section 10 calls for curtailing Insurrection Act violations of individuals' liberties. It states the president may not invoke the authority under this section unless the president and the Secretary of Defense certify to Congress that the state concerned is unable or unwilling to suppress an insurrection described in subsection A. This is a major change to the Insurrection Act first invoked by Thomas Jefferson more than 200 years ago. Under this amendment, a president would not be able to act quickly and decisively in the event of riots that are not being controlled at the state or municipal level. He would have to, along with the Secretary of Defense, certify certain findings to Congress and then consult with Congress. This would hinder and delay needed action to preserve domestic peace. Any military personnel then deployed would have burdensome restrictions placed upon them that would make them less effective in controlling violence and riots. The $741 billion National Defense Authorization Act has been passed by the House and the Senate. It's now waiting for President Trump to either sign it or veto it. He has until Wednesday or today. If the deadline passes, the bill will become law without Trump's signature. If Trump vetoes the bill, Congress might not have time to override the veto before the current congressional session ends. So what is the Insurrection Act? The original text reads, quote, "An act authorizing the employment of the land and naval forces of the United States in cases of insurrections, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that in all cases of insurrection or obstruction to the laws, either of the United States or of any individual state or territory, where it is lawful for the President of the United States to call forth the militia for the purpose of suppressing such insurrection, or of causing the laws to be duly executed, it shall be lawful for him to employ for the same purposes such part of the land or naval force of the United States as shall be judged necessary, having first observed all the prerequisites of the law in that respect." According to a 2006 report by the Congressional Research Service, the president must first issue a proclamation ordering the insurgents to disperse within a limited time. If the situation does not resolve itself, the president may issue an executive order to send in troops before invoking the act. There has been talk President Trump could invoke the Insurrection Act, but what other avenues are there? Turning to the Constitution, the text is full of ambiguities. As previously covered, law professor Edward Foley ran through some scenarios of what could play out in the 2020 election. In his 54-page report titled "Preparing for a Disputed Presidential Election, an Exercise in Election Risk Assessment and Management" from 2019. He starts off by weighing the possibilities of a contested 2020 election, not because of foreign interference or other events, but just based on ballot counting. This article considers the possibility that a major dispute over the outcome of the 2020 presidential election could arise, even without foreign interference or some other extraordinary event, but rather just from the ordinary process of counting ballots. Building upon previous research on the blue shift phenomenon, whereby adjustments in vote tallies during the canvassing of returns tends to advantage Democratic candidates, it is easy to imagine a dispute arising of this kind of blue shift were consequential in the presidential race. He notes the changes made after the 2020 election, such as an increase in absentee voting, which we saw on a scale never before seen in this 2020 election. Foley starts out with a fictional scenario of election night 2020 that's eerily similar to what actually happened. The night starts off with Trump winning, but media aren't calling it. They're wary after the whole Bush versus Gore case in 2000. Trump is tweeting that he won by a large amount, but by morning there is what Foley calls the blue shift. Overnight, more votes were counted and Trump's lead is slipping. Foley notes that did happen in previous elections, such as in the 2018 midterm elections. Arizona's Senate race flipped blue that year. Florida's governor races saw a similar scene. The Republicans were leading, but the day after election, they saw their lead slipping. The Republican governors went on to win those races, but it was close. If January 20th comes and Trump refuses to concede and says he's still president, and Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, disagrees and says she's acting president, what happens then? Foley proposes a few scenarios. The state's legislature moves to exercise its authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to appoint the state's presidential electors directly. The two chambers would move to overthrow the popular vote and directly appoint the presidential electors, keeping the tally as it was on election night, with Trump still in the lead. Another scenario, the House has an election, 50 states, 50 votes. But if no majority is reached there, then the Senate hopefully has successfully picked a vice president who becomes acting president until the House of Representatives manages to elect a president by the required majority vote. But if the Senate also fails, then the Speaker becomes acting president, Nancy Pelosi. What if come January 20th, Trump refuses to concede and says he's still president, and Nancy Pelosi says she's acting president? What happens then? Foley says if both refuse to give ground, the courts would get involved. But the balance of equities shift increasingly in favor of judicial intervention as the conflict continues, and the practical need for an answer becomes imperative as January 20th approaches. Foley concludes by saying it's ultimately up to Congress. Even if President Trump maintains he's still president, if Congress conclusively concludes that Biden is the winner, then the military will follow suit. But if the two houses of Congress cannot agree as to which candidate won the presidential election, then the Supreme Court would have to step in and settle the matter. But there is another scenario. If there was what Foley calls an extraordinary calamity, like a foreign cyber attack, for there to be conditions enabling partisans to dispute the result. And currently, more Republicans are saying they'll challenge the electoral votes come January 6th. Including Texas Congressman Lance Gooden. He wrote a letter urging Texas Senators Ted Cruz and John Cornyn to join him. He writes, "I cannot in good conscience certify these results. There needs to be a full audit of every ballot in states like Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. We must stand up for the tens of millions of Americans who want answers to the irregularities surrounding this election." So far, no senators have publicly committed to challenging a state's results, although last week Senator Rand Paul suggested he might do it. Leading election officials and members of the media, though, repeatedly deny allegations about election fraud, and judges have thrown out a large number of cases for procedural reasons. It seems there's still a lot of uncertainty around what's going to happen with this election. But what do you think? Let me know below. And before you go, an announcement. There will be no shows tomorrow or Friday. Merry Christmas, and to everyone else, happy holidays. I'll see you all on Monday. Let me know what you want to see more of. Is it more history, more current news? Let me know below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.